Karen Reed is accused of running over her Boston police officer boyfriend, John O'Keefe. She's been charged with murder, but Karen and her defense say that John was killed by fellow officers and she was framed. The defense plans to point the finger at Boston police officer and 34 Fairview homeowner Brian Albert and his ATF buddy Brian Higgins. Higgins was at the party at the Alberts' home that night, and in the days leading up to John O'Keefe's death, Brian Higgins and Karen Reed were exchanging flirtatious text messages, even sharing a kiss. In the first trial, it was Higgins who read those messages to the jury, but today, the jury heard the spicy exchanges through another witness. Tonight, we'll break it all down, plus much more from the Karen Reed retrial. Hey, welcome to Closing Arguments. I'm Ted Rollins in for Vinnie tonight. Oh, another riveting week of testimony in the Karen Reed trial finishing up today in Dedham, Massachusetts. We're going to go through all of it, as we always do on this show. Now, normally retrials, let's face it, they're predictable. They're even boring. Why? Because it's always the same stuff, same witness, the same lawyer. Oh, not this time. No, not this one. And today we saw that play out with one of the Commonwealth's witnesses, Sergeant Yuri Bukhenik. He is now playing the role of himself, Michael Proctor, and apparently, possibly, Brian Higgins. He was on the stand for 2 days, still on the stand, and he was downplaying Proctor's involvement in this case, and he ends up reading those weird text messages we heard the first time around that Brian Higgins and Karen Reed were passing back and forth. Let's get right into it. Let's turn to the man that was in Dedham, Massachusetts, and he has been since the beginning of this trial. Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson joining us live. Matt, all right, another busy week in this ongoing saga that is Karen Reed. Let's start with the trooper on the stand this morning. He went through a lot of ground. What stood out to you?
Trooper Yuri Bukhenik, you know, it's a key player that we saw last year in the first trial. Today we're seeing him on day 13. Today was his second day on the stand, and he's really, in his cross-examination, talking a lot about Trooper Proctor. Now, in his direct examination, he was emphasizing the connection to the case and him being the lead investigator. Well, on cross, it became heated at times. It seems that he really, along with a lot of other witnesses, was mentioning key phrases, including this one, "I hit him." Take a listen.
Words matter, right? I mean, you're testifying, so words do matter.
Words do matter. That's important.
So working off of your, as you put it, your theory, you theorized that there was an impact spot at 34 Fairview, correct?
Based on the statement, I hit him, I assumed that Mr. O'Keefe was impacted with something. Initial hours of the investigation, we had those statements, I hit him. We had the statements that, oh my God, did I hit him? So utilizing that information with the evidence at that point that we had was a broken cocktail glass. So a theory would be, why is the cocktail glass broken? Because it came into contact with the victim.
So the answer to my question, Sergeant, is you were working off of a theory, correct? Yes or no?
We were working off a report of an injured male party, and then we developed the information, collected the evidence, and developed the investigation.
You know what the word theory means?
I'm sorry, English is like a third language for me, so if you can bring up the Webster's Dictionary, I can read it out. You
want me to pull up the Webster's Dictionary? You want to take a break real quick and pull up the Webster's Dictionary to define a word that you used in an answer about 40 seconds ago? We're working off of a theory, quote unquote. You said it, not me. You want me to go get a dictionary so we can figure out for the jurors what that word means?
Remember, Yuri Bukhenik was the overall lead investigator. Trooper Proctor was underneath him during this investigation in the death of Officer John O'Keefe. And the defense really is trying to tie Proctor to all the key evidence. Proctor has since been fired, and by all accounts, Karen Reed tells me that she doesn't think that the Commonwealth is going to call him as a witness. She's not sure if the defense will. And here is another example today in the cross-examination of this defense tying Proctor to that key evidence.
So you had the evidence and turned it over to someone whom you don't know and can't identify. Is that what we understand?
It was a member of the Massachusetts State Police assigned to our office. It wasn't just a random person. I can't specifically identify who it was or who wrote on that bag. I know it was a trusted member of our unit and part of the investigative team.
How do you know it was a trusted member of your unit and a part of the investigative team if you can't tell these jurors who it was? How do you know that?
Because I wouldn't have turned it over to a random stranger.
Okay, so let's figure out the possibilities. Who are among those to whom you would have turned this stuff over? Who are among them?
There was 4 troopers in the detective unit at that point assigned to homicide.
Let's name them. Who are they?
It was Trooper DeChico, Trooper Kakowski, Trooper Dunn, and Trooper Mike Proctor.
As you sit here today, do you believe or do you recall turning it over to Trooper Dunn?
Objection.
We're going to go through each person.
Every one of them. There's only 4.
I'll allow this question.
Do you remember turning it over to Trooper Dunn?
No.
Do you remember turning it over to Trooper Kakowski?
No.
Do you remember turning it over to Trooper DeChico?
No.
Do you remember turning it over to Michael Proctor?
No.
So it might have been just a random stranger. Right?
That's a ridiculous suggestion.
And you know, Ted, the back and forth between Alan Jackson, defense attorney, and this key witness for the Commonwealth is the reason that he's now going to be called back to the stand on Monday. His testimony not over. He's going to testify for a 3rd day.
A lot of Michael Proctor talk. Brian Higgins also may not testify for the Commonwealth, but boy, he was front and center today through the trooper.
Yeah, you know, today we were hearing, Ted, a lot about this motive that the defense wants to create in their, third-party culprit defense. So they invoke the name Brian Higgins quite a bit today, and here's part of that testimony.
You did learn that Brian Higgins, on January 29th, January 28th, going into January 29th, 2022, had what could be generally referred to as a romantic interest in Ms. Reed?
Objection.
Sustained.
Would you describe the text messages between Brian Higgins and Karen Reed that he presented to you as flirtatious in nature?
Without having recently reviewed them in detail, I don't want to label it something without having complete understanding of the content. I'm not comfortable putting a label on something.
Do you remember a text message exchange about a kiss that was shared?
Objection.
Sustained.
And then the biggest moment of the day, Ted, was probably these text messages that were read, and there were quite a few of them being read between the defendant and also Brian Higgins, but they were read by this witness, Yuri Bukhenik, and it really pinpoints what the defense is trying to create in terms of a motive and also this possible love triangle as they try to build their case in chief. And then there was another big moment when they were playing video of that play fighting, quote unquote, over at the Waterfall Bar between Brian Albert and Brian Higgins. That also goes to the defense case in chief and really important as their names were invoked with this witness. Take a listen.
At some point, this is just yes or no. At some point, did you become aware of a call between Brian Higgins and Brian Albert at 2:22 a.m. on the morning of the 29th? Just yes or no?
No.
As you sit here today, this is new information to you. Let me rephrase that. This is unknown information to you. You do not have any information about that?
Objection.
Sustained. We need a time frame, Mr. Jackson.
I realize that, Judge. That's why I'm asking it this way. As you sit here, are you aware of a phone call between Brian Albert and Brian Higgins at 2:22 a.m. on January 29th, 2022?
Look, you just shared that with me. I have no memory or record of seeing that it actually took place. I do not know.
Okay, so you've never heard that before. That was what I was getting to. You've never heard that before.
No.
And remember, before the trial even started, Judge Beverly Cannoni was very clear on this. The defense could not open on a third-party defense, but they could try to introduce evidence of third-party culprit, not on Colin Albert like they tried to do last year, but on Brian Higgins and Brian Albert, the homeowner at 34 Fairview. Yes, he sold the home. He was also a fellow police officer. But I don't think that we're there yet, Ted. They still have to meet that threshold.
Yeah, but they're chipping away, or doing their best at it. Before we let you go, Matt, we have to ask you of what has set the X on fire. People accusing of Karen Reed flipping the bird in the courtroom. I want to get your opinion of this. You know, we've seen the video of it, scratching her face with one finger.
Right. Okay, so the first thing that you have to understand is this is a very, very tight courtroom. Everyone is close together. So what I'll say about this is the fact that when she's scratching her face, that is actually facing a window. Maybe members of the media could have seen that if it was intentional, if it wasn't. It also faces, quite frankly, the O'Keefe side of the courtroom, not the jury and not the witness. They would not have been able to see that if it was intentional from their point of view. Now, I will also say this, Karen Reed, it may be a tick. You know, it might not have been intentional. We don't know. But I have seen her in the courtroom, even when the courtroom is completely empty almost, and she uses various fingers at the temple of her head, scratching her head. So I'm not convinced, but again, like everything in this case, everybody has an opinion.
Absolutely, and strong opinions at that. Matt Johnson, another wonderful week of reporting from Dedham. You'll have some company next week. Vinnie is making his way up there, and we'll be joining you for the week. Good stuff. Thanks, Matt. Enjoy your weekend. We appreciate it. Let's bring in our guests, the Karen Reed Insiders, joined by criminal defense attorney John Krowski Jr., Karen Reed supporter Nick Rocco, and John DePietro, host of and creator of Road Patrol Live in the courtroom this week. John was. John, let's start with you. What's your take on Karen Reed and the finger? I don't know. Matt seems to really downplay it. And I agree. I mean, what is she doing? What's your take?
I think there's something to it, and I look at it differently. The way she's angled, she seems to be looking right at the witness box. Now, there have been problems back and forth. There's bad blood right now between the families. Matt's right. It is a small courtroom, and these people have spent a lot of time together. But you had a situation where Paul O'Keefe got bumped to the back row. There was also an odd situation where Bill Reed, Karen's father, suddenly, something happened. He was making faces at the jury, and you can actually see in that footage, there's a court officer sitting next to her dad. Karen has made faces at Peg O'Keefe going up to sidebar. I think there's something to it. It was a long day. It's a long week. She certainly doesn't like Yuri. They're reading these texts that are so uncomfortable. And I think that was one of her ways of expressing herself, Ted.
John, let's talk about the trooper on the stand. It sure seems as though the Commonwealth is not going to bring up Proctor, which probably a good idea. And this was thought about, you know, even before trial, a lot of speculation that wouldn't happen. But what about Higgins? Do you think they'll bring Higgins in? Do they have to bring Higgins in? Or is it a smart move to leave him out, maybe even Brian Albert?
I don't think they bring him in.
I think you're referring. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, John. Yeah, go ahead.
Joe
Krowski Jr.
Joe.
Sorry. We got two Johns. Joseph.
I'm Joe, actually.
I'm sorry, Joseph. That's the problem.
Hey, that's okay. So look, right, they did motion to the court to get in third-party culprit, and they're limited to Brian Higgins and Brian Albert. In Massachusetts, you have to have a substantial basis to introduce evidence of third-party culprit, and they certainly are attempting to chip away. Now, they offered, and I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later, But offering those texts, I believe, was one attempt to start bringing Brian Higgins into the fold. However, I don't think they were admitted for that purpose. I think that, if I understood the argument from Attorney Jackson correctly, they were admitted to show that as the investigator, Trooper Bukhenik, who's a supervisor in this case, had this information of this love tryst and had a responsibility to at least investigate it. That's called a Bowden defense. But I also think there was a dual motive from the defense to start introducing the name Brian Higgins, because we really have not heard much about Brian Higgins or Brian Albert up to this point. It's been Proctor, Proctor, Proctor.
And so will the Commonwealth bring Higgins on, do you think? Or do they need to?
I think they've already acknowledged during the lead up and the motions in limine that they don't intend to call Brian Higgins. I guess from their perspective, they don't need to. He doesn't produce any evidence that would be probative of the essential elements for the crimes that Karen Reed is charged with. Brian Higgins is really a defense witness. Now, it might confuse people because in trial one, they did call him, but I think the strategy at that time was to disprove the defense. I think the strategy has changed and been retooled, and now it's more about proving the case instead of disproving a defense theory. And I think it's a better strategy, and I think it's selling better, and it's more concise, and it's easier to follow.
Nick, Rocco, a lot of people think that the Commonwealth in Karen Reed 2 is doing a much better job and is really solidifying their case and just making it clear. And, you know, Hank Brennan at the lead, you're a Karen Reed supporter. What's your take? Are you worried?
No, I'll never be worried because there's so much reasonable doubt in this case to convict Karen Reed of any of the crimes that they're charging her with. I will admit Hank Brennan is doing a better job than Adam Lally did. I think everybody could admit that. But at the same time, Hank Brennan is, you know, he's not calling these people purposefully, obviously, because it's going to hurt his case. He knows calling Brian Albert, Michael Proctor, Higgins, and the rest of the crew is not gonna benefit him. Now, the role of a prosecutor is to bring out the truth. So, you know, those people would get on the stand and say that John O'Keefe never came in the house, which would go to what they believe is the truth and proof that he wasn't there. So I would hope that the defense team does call them, because the jury needs to know the fact that Brian Higgins threw out his cell phone in a dumpster, the fact that Brian Albert got rid of his phone all before the preservation order, you know, the fact that Chloe was rehomed not once but twice. So bringing Brian Albert onto the stand is going to provide more of that information to the jury, which will ultimately go to the third-party culprit.
Yeah, all those things brought up in the openings by Alan Jackson, so I'm sure the jury will hear all of that during either the Commonwealth's case through cross-examination or the defense case. Let's get a break. Think Tank's going to stay right where they are. When we come back, those weird flirty messages between Brian Higgins and Karen Reed, the jury heard it. Who does it help? We'll talk about it. Plus, coming up next hour on VPI. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, the prosecution says Karen Reed killed John O'Keefe with her vehicle. The defense says he was killed by fellow cops inside of 34 Fairview. But could something more complicated have happened that doesn't fit into either one of those theories? We investigate.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates. Tonight, 9/8 Central, only on Court TV.
You watched while your patient was lying there, being tortured.
What else was I supposed to do?
So much for your career in caretaking.
Interview with a Killer, season finale, Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
The defendant kissed me.
And how did she kiss you?
Not like a friend.
Lip to lip, is that fair to say?
Yes.
Like a romantic kiss?
That's the way I interpreted it.
Last year, Karen Reed's in for Karen Reed's first trial. ATF agent Brian Higgins there, he was called by the Commonwealth. He told the jurors all about his little thing with Karen. And he ended up reading those text messages between he and Karen. And he's, you know, as you heard there, Karen kissed him apparently after a Patriots game at John O'Keefe's house. So this time around, we haven't heard from Higgins yet, and we don't know if Higgins will take the stand in terms of the Commonwealth's case or even at all. But we did hear from some of those, we heard some of those text messages, and we heard another person, Yuri Bukhenik. He was forced to sit on the witness stand today, a little uncomfortable for the sergeant, and he had to read those flirty texts.
Sunday, January 16th, 12:59 a.m. You're nuts. Foul ball. You stink. You suck. And you're double trouble. You're hot. Are you serious or messing with me? No, I'm serious. Feeling is mutual. Is that bad? How long have you thought that? Are you okay driving? You don't want to stay here? I am fine. I have an office at the PD. You didn't answer the question. Rather you stay here? I wish. I think you're messing with me. Why do you think that? Because this is so out of left field. Where did these feelings come from? I just think you're like me. Meaning, do you have your own kids? I have no kids. How am I like you? Hello? Aren't we alike? I think so. So, why did you get my number and reach out to me? Shoot straight with me. I told you, I just think we're alike, right? Yes, agree. Now what? I don't know. Shouldn't you know? Do you like me? Yes, from jump. When was jump? First time I saw you. When was that? Hillside for sure. When were you interested? I don't know. You're just my type. You think you can handle me? I thought you were happy. How do you know if I'm happy? I just assumed. Are you to handle? What do you like about me? I just feel like you're from my neighborhood. Yeah, ditto. And I think you're hot.
I don't know about all those texts. Still with us, Joseph Krowski Jr., Nick Rocco, John DiPietro, and joining our conversation, Massachusetts trial attorney Wayne Dennison. Wayne, to you first. Who does it help, the icky texts between Karen and Brian Higgins? The defense really wanted the jury to hear them.
Yeah, I'm not sure it helps anybody. And the question I would have had is, who does it hurt more? And frankly, I'm fearful that it might, in fact, be taken against Karen Reed. The perception that the jury has of John O'Keefe right now is that he's an unbelievably good guy, a guy who really steps into the breach, and this kind of back and forth behind his back with somebody else really doesn't reflect well on her.
Yeah, and he's dead, and he took in his, these kids. I mean, he's just like the nicest guy ever. John DiPietro, what was the jury doing during all this?
And just when you would think that Karen Reed couldn't be more unlikable to the jury after those crazy, vicious voicemails midweek, now we have this. It was so awkward in the courtroom. I was watching back and forth. The jury would look at the O'Keefe family, then they'd look at Karen, then they'd look at the O'Keefe family. Yuri Bukhenik, he had no skin in the game. He wasn't one of the ones texting, and he was actually kind of hamming it up a little bit. I also think he kind of redeemed himself because he had been very confrontational with Jackson, and suddenly the jury, it was a light moment, but it really cast her in a bad light. And you have someone obviously drinking heavy and left those crazy voicemails telling John O'Keefe she hated him, and now the jury learned she was actually making moves on one of his friends behind his back. I noticed that the jury was doing like a tennis match ping pong back and forth to the family. I can tell you, Ted, this did not bode well for Karen Reed.
Joseph, from a defense standpoint, they do need, the more they can get out with Higgins, the better chance they have to argue in their closing these third-party culprits. What's your take on the strategy from a defense standpoint of why you want the jurors to see Karen Reed texting back and forth with this individual while she's dating John O'Keefe?
Well, let me say this. Alan Jackson is a fine attorney. And, being a lawyer that tries a lot of cases myself, I don't relish criticizing a fellow attorney. But I thought this was a misstep, and it slowed down some momentum he had generated. He excels at cross-examination when it's contentious. He had built up some momentum, then it switched to this. I think it had a dual purpose. One, they wanted to introduce again Brian Higgins as a possible third-party culprit. That fell flat. If you read the content of those texts, Brian Higgins seems like anything but someone possible that has the potential to kill John O'Keefe. And furthermore, he doesn't seem like someone that has the potential within him that would frame Karen Reed for murder, an innocent person. The other problem is this, really, the story of January 29th so far before this jury is that Karen had been texting John O'Keefe all day, kind of in an obsessive fashion. She's someone that night had drank to excess, and she had become angry, and she struck John. Those texts were really a microcosm of that, right? They were talking about alcohol, talking about problems in a relationship with John, admitted knowing where all the cameras are and the footage that it captured. It talked about jealousy. So I think that the Commonwealth must have been tickled pink when the strategy switched and those texts were put before the jury.
Karen Reed ends up ghosting him on January 23rd, 2022. It appears that she just stops responding to Brian Higgins' messages. They got this thing going, and then boom, nothing. Then on the 28th, 5 days later, Karen and John and Brian all end up, of course, at the Waterfall Bar and Grill, and Higgins sends Karen 2 more texts, to which, again, she doesn't reply. Take a listen.
Sunday, January 23rd, 9:40 p.m. Phone works. Thought you were all set. With talking? No. You sure? Friday, 11:32 p.m. Well. Saturday, 11:54 a.m. John died.
Between January 23rd, when that last text message was sent by Brian Higgins, until January 28th at 11:32, would you describe that as Ms. Reed having ghosted Mr. Higgins for those 5 days?
Strictly looking at the text message communications and not knowing whether they...
Correct. I'm not asking you to speculate. I know there's other stuff you want to say. I'm asking you just to read, but just to answer the question I'm about. Based on the text that are in front of you, Sergeant Buchanan, does it appear that Ms. Reed ghosted, as you define the term, Mr. Higgins, from January 23rd until January 28th?
One could read into that in that manner, yeah.
Nick Rocco, if there was a Karen Reed ghosts Higgins, now Higgins beats up O'Keefe because he's in love with Karen? Is that where we're going with this, do you think?
I think on the lines of that, in the sense of, he had this thing going on with Karen, a text thread where they were exchanging, messages of, compliments to each other, and they shared that kiss, and then all of a sudden, she stops talking to him, and he obviously didn't like that, and hence the I'm well message, meaning, you're not going to talk to me at the bar. Why? Because your boyfriend's here. We have this thing going, and you just kind of, what he said was ghost me. And then the morning of, he gets a text message, John died, which at that point he obviously already knew. But the fact that he didn't answer her stands out to me a little bit, as into, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, or yes, I heard already. But he completely just ignores her, knowing the fact that, he was at the Albert house the night before. He was also at the Albert's house the morning of. He also talked to Chief Berkowitz the morning. So he had already known that John was dead before he got that text message. So the fact that he didn't reach out to her beforehand or answer her text message can only make you believe that what the Commonwealth wants to say Karen Reed has a guilty conscience, he may have had a guilty conscience because he didn't respond to any of those. And I think the reason why these text messages are being put out there by the defense team is to show the jury that, hey, there was something more going on here with Brian Higgins. He might have had some jealousy. And then also, I think another point is where Sergeant Yuri Bukhenik had these messages in hand, he didn't feel it was appropriate to further question Brian Higgins to, well, if you claim John's your friend, but yet here are these text messages, why are you doing this? He could have became a suspect in a different case. So I think that's the reason why the defense team had put these text messages out there.
Well, fair. That's a good point. The last one, John is dead. There was no, yeah, I'm sorry, or any sort of acknowledgement of that, because that's a bigger deal than your little flirty text exchange from the prior couple weeks. Let's get a break. The tank's going to stay right here because when we come back, we're going to talk about how former Trooper Michael Proctor came up again today in cross-examination. Stay with us.
Impact. The site of that impact would be incredibly important, correct?
Very important, yes.
And on February 10th, you went out to the scene and you indicate that you found 6 pieces of black, clear, and red plastic material and 14 pieces of glass material and some other plastic material as well, correct?
Yes.
You didn't photograph it? Is that
No,
right?
I did not.
You didn't do any plotting of cross coordinates, which would have been easy to do to determine exactly where each piece was found, correct?
It would not be easy for me. I don't know how to do that.
Sergeant Yuri Bukhenik on the stand today, cross-examination this morning. He's questioned about the failure to document the exact location of those hugely important pieces of tail light that he and his partner, Trooper Michael Proctor, found at the scene more than 10 days after John O'Keefe's body was found. Bukhenik had been seemingly distancing himself from Proctor. Let's face it, he was trying his best to make Michael Proctor seem like a non-factor in this investigation. But that didn't stop Alan Jackson, of course, from saying Michael Proctor as much as possible, and pointing out the fact that Proctor's handwriting was on the evidence bags that were returned from the scene when they found that evidence.
What date is that?
Date collected is 2/10/22.
So that's the date that we've been talking about, correct?
That is correct.
And this indicates collected by, and who's that?
That's myself, Sergeant Bukhenik.
Description of evidence. This is where the description of the evidence is located on this evidence bag, correct?
General description identifying what's inside.
And what does that description read?
6 pieces of red, black, and clear plastic.
And that's all it says about the description, correct?
Yes.
Then it indicates location where collected. And there's several lines that are available to fill in, correct?
Correct.
On that first line, what does that read?
34 Ferry Road, Canton, MA.
And that's it, correct?
That's all that was put, yes.
And you didn't fill this bag out, did you?
No, I did not.
Who did?
I do not know.
Who did?
I don't know.
You don't recognize the handwriting?
No, I do not.
You don't recognize the handwriting of your partner and subordinate, Michael Proctor?
Objection.
Sustained.
Can you describe for the jurors what they're looking at, please?
This is an evidence bag. It is labeled with case number, date collected, time, who collected it, description of items enclosed, the location it was recovered, and the victim's full name. It also has a to-scale ruler for the photograph and some identifying marks from the laboratory.
Can you indicate for the jurors Who was it that collected this item, according to the evidence bag?
According to this evidence bag, it was collected by Trooper Proctor.
And can you show the date, or tell the jurors the date that it indicates the item was collected, or items were collected?
I believe it says 2/11/22.
February 11th. So that would be the day after you were at the location, correct?
It would be the day after, yes.
You didn't see this item on February 10th when you were there, correct?
If I saw that item, I would have picked it up.
Right. Wasn't there, was it?
That's not what I'm saying. I said if I saw it, I would have picked it up.
But you didn't see it, did you?
I did not see it, obviously.
And of course, we all know what the defense believes is that it was planted by Proctor. Let's bring back our insiders, Joseph Krowski Jr., Karen Reed supporter Nick Rocco. He's now on the phone. He's got a little problem with the old internet. And John DePietro, along with Wayne Dennison. Wayne, to you on this one. At this point in the case, the Commonwealth has done a very good job, in my opinion, of distancing themselves from the defense theory, which was not the case the first time around with Karen Reed 1, because they were bringing everybody out one after another for them to be cross-examined on this whole theory, including Higgins and Albert and everybody else in the House. What's your take overall where the Commonwealth is right now?
Well, trials are really a function of momentum, and the momentum right now is very much in favor of the prosecution. And quite frankly, with respect to the first trial, you've got into a situation where Alan Jackson and the defense team were able to disrupt the momentum over and over and over again with witnesses that the prosecution had in fact called. Right now, we're in a place where the prosecution has been much more streamlined, has been much more thoughtful, and quite frankly, I think much more effective. We're going to get to Proctor, and we're going to hear a lot of Proctor, and the Proctor material will come up during the defense case. But for now, the prosecution is proceeding quite admirably.
Joseph, to that point, at the end of the day, the first jury was hung because there were so many questions. The injuries to John O'Keefe, the experts that testified, the Higgins, the Albert, all of it, it's coming in. It just hasn't come in yet, correct?
We don't know if it's coming in. The Commonwealth, I think, made it too easy for them in trial number 1, again, by trying to disprove a theory of the defense. Look, the Commonwealth does have an obligation to present evidence honestly and truthfully, but they don't have an obligation to chase theories of the defense that they don't believe are accurate. So the problem for the defense right now is they're going to have to call these witnesses because think about it. It's Proctor, Proctor, Proctor. But they've already established evidence was found at the location of the incident, the crash site at 34 Fairview, long before Proctor ever made it to Fairview. So we've heard Proctor, 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 but we haven't heard any malfeasance or misconduct that we can attribute to Proctor. So they're going to have to do it, and the advantage goes to the prosecution because then they can, in a leading form, cross-examine Proctor and really rehabilitate him.
Yeah, the ability, because at the end of the day, what we're going to have is the defense bringing up Proctor's, having Proctor read his text messages. But Wayne, at the end of the day, it was a double Wayne there. At the end of the day, they're going to be able to Joseph's point, cross him and say, well, yeah, but you didn't do this, you didn't do this, and you didn't do this. Meaning you didn't, you have horrible habits on your phone with your texting, and you're not, you're not becoming of a good trooper, but you didn't do X, Y, and Z. How much of an advantage is it to cross Proctor rather than have him and call him as your witness?
Well, it's much easier to put your own words in some other witness's mouth and have them say yes or no. And I personally like to cross. It's much easier than trying to do direct examination where you have to elicit answers and the answers can go in any direction that the witness says. It's a much easier task to cross-examine.
Nick, on the phone again, Nick Rocco. Karen Reed supporter. Are you confident that at the end of the day, this jury is going to have the same exposure as the first jury in terms of evidence?
Yeah, I believe that once they see the autopsy photos of John O'Keefe and they did get a glimpse of his arm in the opening of the defense case, but once they see these injuries to John O'Keefe, I feel like they're going to be insulted because the injuries on John O'Keefe does not look like he got struck by a vehicle. The state's own medical examiner stated that the injuries on John O'Keefe are not common with a pedestrian vehicle homicide. So anybody with a set of eyes can see the only injuries are dog bites or scratches on his arm and a 3-inch gash to the back of his head. Tail light does not do that to you. A vehicle is going to cause bruising or broken bones, and I think that's going to be the hardest part for the Commonwealth to overcome, is the fact that the injuries just don't match up with someone being struck by a vehicle. And when the defense puts their case on, last time they only called 6 people. They're going to call more people than that. They have better, stronger witnesses this time to go against or for the dog bites. And then also, ARCA has now done their own testings, and they're going to be able to testify to not only what they did last time, but what they did this time at the request of the defense, because now they are being retained by them. So it's going to be a different story when the defense gets out there.
All right, good point. We need a break. Thank you to the Tank, Joseph Krowski Jr., Wayne Dennison, Nick Rocco, and John DePietro. Appreciate it. That's all the time we have right now. When we come back, we'll reveal something else you need to know. Plus, coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, could pieces of the prosecution and defense theories of John O'Keefe's death be true at the same time? Could John have hit his head and been attacked by an animal? We investigate.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, coming up next, only on Court TV. Starting Monday, Vinnie Politan is live from Dedham, Massachusetts for the Karen Reed trial.
We'll be on location talking Karen Reed with a live studio audience.
Closing arguments, Monday night, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
All right, it's that time when we reveal something else you need to know. And let's put it up on the big board. This Sunday on Court TV, the Season 2 finale of Interview with a Killer airs 8 o'clock Eastern. In the season's conclusion, investigative journalist David Scott confronts a woman known as the caregiver killer, Alicia Keeter, and her boyfriend killed and robbed John Fernandez back in a 65-year-old man. He was in a wheelchair after she agreed to take care of him. Take a listen.
It's been my passion to work in nursing homes.
One of our residents passed away.
On the next Interview with a Killer.
You watched and stood by while your patient was lying there being tortured.
What else was I supposed to do?
That's so conniving. Can you understand that? So much for your career in caretaking.
Interview with a Killer, season finale, Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
Oh, I love that David Scott. He gets in there and he does it every time. Again, you can see the season finale of Interview with a Killer Sunday night, 8 Eastern, right here on Court TV. Before we head out this hour, there is a picture we need to show you. This is Christianna Lynn Murray. She is 17 years old, last seen in Westland, Michigan on May 8th. If you have any information about where Christianna is tonight, call the Westland Police Department, that number on your screen, or you can always call 911 or 1-800-THE-LOST. Let's see if we can get her to a safe place tonight. A lot of people are worried about her. Don't go anywhere. We have another hour of live true crime coming up next. It's Vinnie Politan Investigates. Back after this.